My husband texted from Vegas. Just married your sister. You are pathetic, by the way. I replied, cool. Then I blocked his cards and changed the house locks. Next morning, police were at my door. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I would love to know which city you are joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. It was a Tuesday. I find it strange now how I always circle back to that simple fact, as if the day of the week could somehow contain the absolute magnitude of what happened. But it was a Tuesday in October. It was the kind of evening where a little chill sneaks into the air right after the sun goes down, reminding you that winter is well on its way. I was curled up on the sofa in our living room. I had a soft, heavy chenille blanket pulled up over my lap, and I was holding a warm mug of chamomile tea. I was watching some late-night television host make jokes about the news. The house was incredibly quiet. But you have to understand, it was not an empty, lonely quiet. It was a settled quiet. It was the comfortable, heavy silence that builds over 15 years of a shared life with a man. My husband, Vernon. For 15 years, I had built my entire world around that quiet. I listened to the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I listened to the gentle, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock out in the hallway. It was just the background noise of a life I thought was incredibly stable. A life I thought was predictable. A life I truly thought was mine to keep. Vernon was away on his annual sales conference in Las Vegas. He was a regional manager for an industrial parts company. They sold things like ball bearings and manufacturing equipment. It was something profoundly uninteresting, but it paid the bills, even though my own salary as a senior financial analyst was always the real backbone of our household finances. I never went with him on these business trips. He always came home and complained that they were a complete bore. He would tell me about the endless, dry seminars, the stuffy hotel conference rooms, and the forced, awkward dinners with his loud colleagues. I never minded staying behind. In fact, I secretly loved it. It gave me a few days of total peace. It was like a small, quiet vacation from my own life. I would have the entire king-sized bed to myself. I could watch the dramatic television shows he always hated and complained about. I could eat a bowl of cereal for dinner at 7 o'clock if I felt like it, without having to prepare a full meat and potatoes meal. It was our routine. It was a comfortable, deeply predictable routine. Earlier that afternoon, I had walked out to our backyard and taken a picture of the autumn leaves. The maple tree was a beautiful, bright burst of red and gold. I texted the picture to Vernon. I typed, "Hope the seminars are not too boring." He never replied. I did not think much of it at the time. I set my phone down and went about my evening. I figured he was probably stuck in a late meeting, or maybe he was out at that fancy steak dinner he was always talking about wanting to try. My phone was lying face down on the wooden end table next to the sofa. The sudden, sharp buzz of the vibration against the wood made me jump. The sound was incredibly loud in the silent room. I glanced over at the grandfather clock. It was 2:47 in the morning. I let out a soft breath, figuring it was Vernon finally getting back to his hotel room and texting me good night before he went to sleep. I reached over, picked up the phone, and smiled, fully expecting a simple, "Night, honey." His name was right there on the bright screen. But what appeared below his name was not a text message. It was a picture. The quality of the photo was poor, a little grainy, bathed in the garish, electric pink glow of a cheap Las Vegas wedding chapel sign. Vernon stood right in the center of the frame. His arms were slung tightly, possessively, around the waist of a woman. She was wearing a short, incredibly tight, white dress made of satin and cheap lace that looked like it came directly from a discount party store. She was holding up a piece of paper toward the camera. It was a marriage certificate. She was beaming, flashing a smile so wide and triumphant that it actually looked painful on her face. Vernon was grinning, too. It was a smug, arrogant smirk that I had not seen on his face since the day he got his last big promotion at work. I stared at the screen. I blinked, my brain struggling to process the visual information. I looked closer at the woman. I looked at her nose. I looked at her eyes. The woman in the cheap white dress was my sister. My little sister, Darlene. I think my heart actually stopped beating for a few seconds. I could not pull air into my lungs. I just sat there, frozen under my chenille blanket, staring into the eyes of the little girl I had practically raised. Darlene. I was the one who taught her how to put on mascara for her first middle school dance because our mother was too busy. I was the one who held her trembling hand when she got her ears pierced. I was the one who emptied out my savings account years ago to give her the down payment for her very first car so she could get to community college. My sister. Then, my eyes slowly scanned down to the words typed underneath the photo. It was 5 sentences. 5 short sentences that felt like heavy stones being thrown, one by one, straight through the fragile glass window of my life. Just married Darlene. Been sleeping with her for 8 months. Your boring, predictable life made this so easy. Enjoy your sad little world. The words simply did not compute in my mind. My brain aggressively tried to reject them. I tried to categorize the message as a sick, twisted joke. A prank. Maybe they had too much to drink at the casino and thought this would be hilarious. But the marriage certificate in her hand looked terrifyingly real. 8 months. My mind violently raced backward, flipping through the memories of the past year like a frantic movie reel. I saw all the red flags I had cheerfully ignored. The whispered, muffled phone calls Vernon had taken in the spare bedroom, which he always claimed were just about a difficult client who did not understand boundaries. The sudden, unexplained overtime at the office on Friday evenings. The way he started paying so much more attention to his hair and his clothes. And Darlene. I thought about the way Darlene had been acting so distant lately. So evasive. She stopped coming over for our Sunday coffee dates. She always had an excuse. At our great-aunt's funeral 6 months ago, I remembered seeing Darlene and Vernon standing together out by the parked cars, laughing softly and speaking in hushed tones. I had smiled at the time, thinking it was so sweet that my husband and my sister were finally bonding. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was all right there in front of my face. A massive, glaring constellation of red flags, and I had been far too blind, far too trusting, and far too in love to see any of it. The air in the living room suddenly felt incredibly thick, like I was trying to breathe underwater. My ears started to ring with a low, persistent, high-pitched hum. On the television, the late-night host's voice became a distorted, meaningless warble of sound. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone against the wall. I did not collapse onto the floor in a puddle of tears. Instead, a strange, glacial calm began to spread through my veins. It was like ice water flushing through my system, instantly freezing the panic, the humiliation, and the agonizing pain before any of it could truly take root in my chest. It was as if the emotional, loving part of my brain just shut itself off completely to protect me from dying of a broken heart, and a different, much older, entirely reptilian part of my brain took over the controls. It was the part of a woman's brain that is built purely for survival. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. I looked around the living room. Our living room. I looked at the framed photo sitting perfectly on the mantelpiece. There was a picture of us on our wedding day, smiling under a floral arch. There was a picture of us on a hiking trip to the Grand Canyon, looking sunburned and happy. There was a picture of us standing with my parents in front of the Christmas tree last year. Every single piece of it was a lie. My home was nothing but a carefully curated museum of a life that was not real. I realized exactly what was happening in Las Vegas at that very moment. Vernon was expecting a massive meltdown. He and Darlene were probably huddled together on the edge of a bed in some tacky, overly air-conditioned hotel room, staring at his phone, eagerly waiting for my name to pop up. They were waiting for the hysterical, tearful, screaming phone call. They wanted to hear my voice break. They wanted the chaotic drama. They desperately wanted the twisted satisfaction of hearing my pain, so they could feel powerful. I picked up the phone again. My thumb hovered directly over the digital keyboard. I thought of all the horrible, vicious things I could say. I thought of all the burning rage and absolute betrayal I could pour into a long, screaming paragraph. But why? Why on earth would I give them the satisfaction of knowing they destroyed me? They did not deserve my words. They did not deserve my tears. They certainly did not deserve my anger. I looked at the keyboard. I typed a single word. 4 letters that felt colder and harder than forged steel. COOL. I pressed send. And in that exact fraction of a second, Loretta, the boring, predictable, blindly supportive wife, died on that sofa. Someone else was born in her place. The moment I hit send, a switch flipped hard inside my head. The world, which had been fuzzy and distant just a minute ago, snapped into razor-sharp focus. The crushing grief and the blinding shock were still sitting right there inside my chest, of course, but I mentally packed them into a very small, very tight box, locked it, and shoved it deep into a dark corner of my mind. I knew there would be plenty of time to cry and mourn the death of my family later. But right now? Right now was the time for action. I stood up. I tossed the chenille blanket aside. I walked straight down the hallway and into my small home office. Vernon never saw this room as anything important. He affectionately, and somewhat condescendingly, referred to it as the place where I did my little paperwork projects and paid the utility bills. He had absolutely no idea that this small room, with its oak desk and dual monitors, was the place where the real, absolute power in our marriage resided. Years ago, early in our marriage, Vernon had secretly invested a massive chunk of our joint savings into a friend's supposedly foolproof startup business. It was a complete scam, and the business folded in 3 months. Because he was so stressed about losing the money, he completely forgot to pay our property taxes for 2 years. We received a notice of foreclosure. We nearly lost the roof over our heads. After I cleaned up that horrific, terrifying mess, I sat him down and made the new rules completely clear. I told him I would handle the money. All of it. Every single penny that came in and went out. He had handed over the checkbooks and the account passwords with a massive shrug of relief. He was completely happy to be totally free of the burden of adult responsibility. He honestly thought managing finances was a tedious chore. I, on the other hand, knew that managing the finances was ultimate control. I sat down in my ergonomic desk chair. My hands were perfectly steady as I tapped the space bar on my computer keyboard, waking the machine from its sleep mode. The large monitor flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow across my face in the dark room. I stared at the screen and started a mental checklist. I was going to be methodical. I was going to be precise. I was going to sever his lifelines. First on the list, the plastic. Vernon walked around with a thick leather wallet stuffed completely full of shiny credit cards. He loved flashing them at dinners. But what he conveniently forgot was that every single one of those premium cards were simply authorized user extensions of my own primary accounts. My credit score was immaculate. His was a disaster. I opened the web browser and navigated directly to the American Express portal. I typed in my password. It was a complex string of characters based on a quote from my favorite historical novel, something Vernon never read and could never possibly guess. The main dashboard loaded. I clicked on the tab labeled Account Services, and then selected Manage Authorized Users. There it was. His name, Vernon, and a little digital icon smiling right back at me. Beside his name was a small, wonderful button that simply said Remove. I clicked it. A warning box immediately popped up in the center of the screen. It read, "This action is immediate and cannot be undone. All charging privileges for this user will be revoked instantly. Are you sure you wish to proceed?" A very grim, completely humorless smile touched the corners of my lips. Yes, I whispered to the empty room. I clicked the confirmation button. I did not stop there. I opened a new tab and did the exact same thing for the Capital One card. Then the Chase Sapphire card. I even logged into the system for the high-end department store card that we only ever used once a year for Christmas shopping and wiped him from that, too. In a matter of less than 5 minutes, Vernon's entire purchasing power in Las Vegas, a city built entirely on taking people's money, had been aggressively reduced to absolutely nothing but whatever loose cash he happened to have folded inside his pocket. Next on my digital demolition list was the bank account. Our main checking account was held at a local, community credit union. It was actually an account I had opened in my own name a full 3 years before our wedding day. After we got married, I just added his name to it for convenience so his company could directly deposit his salary there. He carried a blue debit card linked directly to those funds. I knew I could not legally remove his name from the joint account in the middle of the night. That kind of action would require physical paperwork, signatures, and a notary public. But I did not need to remove his name. I could do something significantly better. I logged into the credit union portal. The password was my maternal grandmother's maiden name. I successfully navigated to the transfer funds page. Under the From drop-down menu, I selected our primary joint checking account, which currently held a very healthy balance. For the to destination, I chose my own private, high-yield savings account. It was housed at a completely different, online-only banking institution. It was an account Vernon did not even know existed. I called it my emergency safety net. I looked at the total balance in the checking account. I did some very quick mental math. I typed in the transfer amount, intentionally leaving exactly $194.50 behind in the joint account. Why that exact odd number? Because I knew the monthly gas and heating bill was scheduled for automatic withdrawal the very next morning, and it was going to be exactly $190. I wanted to make sure my utility bill was paid on time so my credit would not take a hit. But the remaining $4.50? That would not be nearly enough for Vernon to buy a plane ticket home. It would not be enough to pay for another night in a Vegas hotel. It would barely be enough to buy a bad cup of coffee at the airport terminal. I clicked Submit Transfer. The green checkmark appeared. Transfer complete. The money was gone. The cell phone plan was the final digital target. We were on a family data plan, which was, of course, entirely under my name and my social security number because I got the corporate discount through my job. I went to the mobile provider's website and logged into the dashboard. I stared at his phone number on the screen. I could have easily just clicked the button to cancel his line entirely. But canceling it felt a little too clean. It felt too easy. Instead, I clicked on the Support tab and found the specific option to report a mobile device as lost or stolen. The website asked me to confirm that I wanted to suspend the service immediately to prevent unauthorized usage. I checked the box. A few more swift clicks of the mouse, and his cellular service was completely suspended. The network would shut his phone off. No outgoing calls. No incoming calls. No text messages. No internet data to check his empty bank accounts. Vernon was now stranded on an island in the middle of the Nevada desert, and I had just gleefully pulled up every single bridge connecting him to the mainland. I glanced at the clock on my computer screen. It was 3:15 in the morning. I was completely done with the digital demolition. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and took a deep breath. The heavy silence of the house was pressing in on me again. Deep down, the tightly packed box of pain in the corner of my mind was rattling violently. The image of Darlene in that white dress kept trying to flash behind my eyes. The thought of them laughing at my predictable life was burning the back of my throat. But I fiercely ignored it. I shut the box down harder. I was not finished yet. There was one more extremely important thing I needed to do before the sun came up. I had severed his financial access. Now, I needed to physically secure the perimeter of my home. I picked up my own cell phone and opened the internet browser. I typed 24-hour emergency locksmith near me into the search bar. The very first sponsored result that popped up was Liberty Locksmith Services. I tapped the phone number to dial. It rang 4 times before the line clicked open. A heavy, groggy male voice answered. Liberty Locksmith. Clifford speaking. How can I help you? Hello, Clifford, I said. I was genuinely surprised by how clear and even my own voice sounded. It was as smooth and hard as a frozen lake. My name is Loretta. I have a severe residential emergency, and I need every single exterior lock on my house changed immediately. Tonight. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him taking a breath. Ma'am, Clifford said slowly, it is 3:15 in the morning. Is there an active threat inside the home? Are you in danger? Should I dispatch the police to your location first? No police are necessary, Clifford. Thank you for asking, I said calmly. The threat has already been neutralized. However, I need to ensure that my home remains completely secure. I need the front door, the back patio door, and the side door leading into the garage completely rekeyed with new deadbolts. I heard Clifford sigh. Ma'am, I can do that, but an emergency call-out at this hour of the night is going to cost you a premium rate. The base fee alone is going to be $350, plus the cost of the new hardware. I completely understand, I said without missing a beat. I will have $450 in cash waiting for you, which includes a $100 tip for your trouble, if you can guarantee you will be standing at my front door with your tools in the next 30 minutes. I could almost hear the financial gears turning rapidly in his head. A $100 cash tip was a lot of money for a middle-of-the-night run. I am putting my work boots on right now, ma'am, Clifford said, his voice suddenly wide awake. Text me your exact address. I will see you shortly. I texted him the address and ended the call. I had 30 minutes to kill. While I waited for the locksmith to arrive, I decided to perform one final, incredibly cathartic physical task. I walked out of the office and began moving through the house like a quiet, highly focused storm. I was no longer a grieving wife, I was an eviction crew. I marched into our master bedroom and threw open the doors to his side of the walk-in closet. I grabbed his expensive tailored suits, the ones I had painstakingly taken to the dry cleaners for him every single week. I ripped them off the hangers and threw them into a massive pile on the floor. I grabbed his casual shirts, his perfectly folded sweaters, and his slacks. I scooped them all up in my arms and marched down the stairs, dumping the massive load of fabric directly onto the hardwood floor in the front entryway. I walked back upstairs and went into the bathroom. I swept his cologne, his razor, and his toothbrush into a plastic grocery bag and tossed it onto the clothing pile. I went into the laundry room and grabbed his smelly, heavy leather gym bag. I threw it on top. Then, I walked out to the attached garage. I found his expensive, customized set of golf clubs leaning against the wall. I dragged the heavy bag across the concrete and hauled it into the house, dropping it with a loud clatter next to the clothes. I pulled down the folding stairs to the attic. I climbed up into the dusty heat and found the 3 large plastic storage bins holding his incredibly precious, pristine, unopened collection of vintage Star Wars action figures. He treated those toys better than he treated me. I dragged the heavy bins down the stairs, one by one, and stacked them neatly next to the golf clubs. By the time I was done, I had built a massive, towering monument to a man who no longer lived in this house. The pile of belongings completely blocked the front entryway. I stood back and wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead. I stared at the mountain of his life. It was a strangely, deeply satisfying visual. Just a few hours ago, these objects were familiar, intimate parts of my daily environment. Now, completely stripped of any love or connection, they just looked like a pile of useless junk left behind by a total stranger. At exactly 4 o'clock in the morning, the bright headlights of a white commercial van swept across my living room curtains. The van pulled silently into my driveway. I opened the front door. Clifford walked up the path. He was a big, burly man wearing heavy denim work pants and a thick flannel shirt. He had a graying beard and kind, deeply tired eyes. He stepped onto the porch and stopped dead in his tracks. He looked down at the massive mountain of men's clothing, golf clubs, and plastic bins blocking the doorway. Then, he slowly raised his eyes and looked at my face. He saw my calm, determined, tearless expression. I watched his facial expression soften with immediate understanding. He was a locksmith who worked the graveyard shift. I am sure he had seen every kind of domestic disaster imaginable. He did not ask me a single question about the clothes. He did not ask about my husband. "You just show me which locks need replacing, ma'am," was all Clifford said, hefting his heavy metal tool bag onto his shoulder. I pointed him to the doors. For the next hour, the loud, aggressive, whining sound of his electric power drill echoing through the quiet house felt like an absolute declaration of my independence. Every time a screw was driven into the wood, I felt stronger. Whir. Click. A brand new, heavy-duty deadbolt was installed on the back door. Whir. Click. A reinforced handle set was secured on the garage entrance. By 5 o'clock in the morning, the sky outside my windows was just beginning to lighten, shifting from pitch black to a deep, bruised shade of purple. The job was finished. My house was officially a fortress. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up an envelope, and handed Clifford 4 crisp $100 bills and a $50 bill. "Thank you, Clifford," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "You honestly have no idea how much peace of mind you have given me tonight." He tucked the money into his shirt pocket and gave me a respectful nod. "You just stay safe in here, ma'am. Have a good morning." He walked out. I pushed the heavy, solid wood front door shut. I reached up and turned the brand new brass latch. The loud, final, immensely satisfying thud of the metal deadbolt sliding securely into the doorframe echoed loudly through the empty hallway. My home was exclusively mine again. I walked heavily up the stairs. My body was suddenly entirely drained of adrenaline, leaving me feeling like an empty shell. I walked into the bedroom, stripped off my clothes, and put on a clean nightgown. I climbed into the bed. I did not stay on my usual side. I moved directly into the center of the mattress, spreading my arms out into the cool, empty space. I closed my eyes, and surprisingly, I fell into a deep, heavy, entirely dreamless sleep. I was violently jolted awake by a sound that completely bypasses the logical ears and sends an electric shock straight into the adrenal glands. Bam. 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 It was a hard, aggressive, rhythmic pounding on the heavy wood of my front door. It was not a friendly, social knock from a neighbor. It was a loud, demanding summons. My eyes snapped open. I stared blindly at the ceiling for a second, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned my head and looked at the digital clock sitting on my nightstand. The glowing red numbers read 8:15 in the morning. Bright, cheerful sunlight was aggressively streaming through the gaps in the window blinds. For one highly disoriented, confusing second, my sleep-addled brain tried to convince me that I had just dreamed the entire horrible night. The text message from Vegas. The picture of Darlene in the cheap dress. The locksmith. The cold, calculating fury. Maybe it was all just a terrible nightmare. Then, I shifted my weight and felt the vast, pristine emptiness of the bed sheets next to me. The reality of my new life came rushing back into my brain like a massive tidal wave. Bam. 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 The pounding came again, significantly louder and more insistent this time. Someone was going to break the door off its hinges. I slowly slid out of bed. My heart was maintaining a steady, rapid drumbeat in my chest, but surprisingly, I was not afraid. The capacity for fear had been completely burned out of my system sometime around 3 o'clock in the morning when I canceled his credit cards. What I felt right now was a very grim, cold sense of inevitability. I walked over to the closet, pulled my heavy silk robe off its hook, and cinched the belt tightly around my waist. I walked out of the bedroom and descended the stairs. I had to carefully step around the massive pile of Vernon's belongings blocking the entryway to reach the door. I leaned forward and looked through the small glass peephole. I saw the sharp blue uniforms. 2 police officers were standing on my front porch. I could see the flashing light bar of their black and white patrol car parked at the curb out front. I rolled my eyes. Of course. Of course this was his absolute next move. Vernon was a coward who always needed someone else to fight his battles. When his credit cards declined at the hotel front desk, and his phone magically stopped working, he realized he was trapped. So, he decided to play the ultimate victim. He decided to call the authorities on his own wife to try and intimidate me into submission. I stood behind the door and took a very deep, slow, calming breath. I smoothed my hands down the front of my silk robe. I reached out, turned the heavy, unfamiliar new brass deadbolt, and pulled the door open. "Good morning, officers," I said. My voice was perfectly clear, polite, and completely steady. The 2 men looked at me. The older officer standing in front had a thick, graying mustache and the deep, weary eyes of a man who had spent 30 years watching messy domestic disputes end terribly. The younger officer stood slightly behind him, his hand resting casually near his utility belt. "Are you Loretta, ma'am?" the older officer asked, his tone professional but guarded. "I am," I replied, keeping my hands visible by my sides. "Ma'am, we received a call from dispatch regarding your husband, a Mr. Vernon," the officer said. He pulled a small, spiral-bound notepad from his shirt pocket and flipped it open. "He called the emergency line to state that you have illegally locked him out of his primary legal residence. He is also making several serious claims regarding the theft of his personal property and the unauthorized restriction of access to his salary and banking funds." The sheer, unmitigated gall of the man was genuinely breathtaking. He abandoned his marriage, married my sister, sent me a message bragging about it, and then called the cops to complain that his debit card did not work. I did not get angry. I kept my face arranged in a perfect, flawless mask of polite, wifely concern. "My husband, Vernon?" I asked, tilting my head slightly as if I were genuinely confused by the question. "Is he here? I would very much like to speak with him, please." "No, ma'am, he is not on the premises," the older officer replied. "He stated he is currently en route from the Las Vegas airport. He had to call dispatch using a public landline telephone. He said his cellular phone was suddenly deactivated and not working for some unknown reason." The officer looked at me closely, a distinct flicker of police suspicion narrowing his tired eyes. "He sounded quite agitated on the phone, ma'am. Very angry. He requested that we dispatch a unit to this address to ensure he can gain entry into the house upon his arrival. He claims his house key is no longer working in the lock." "Oh, his key will absolutely not work," I said, nodding my head in agreeable confirmation. "I had a locksmith come out and change every single lock on the property at 4 o'clock this morning for emergency security reasons." I let that statement hang in the crisp morning air for a long moment. I watched the younger cop shift his weight uncomfortably from one foot to the other. He clearly thought this was just another standard, messy, he said, she said bitter divorce battle over who gets to keep the television set. "Officers, there seems to be a very fundamental legal misunderstanding occurring here today," I said smoothly, stepping slightly to the side so they could clearly see the massive mountain of Vernon's clothing and Star Wars toys piled in the hallway. "First of all," I continued, "this is not his legal residence. It is entirely mine. I am the sole, exclusive name listed on the property deed. This house was purchased outright, in cash, using funds from a significant inheritance left to me by my late grandmother. I bought this property a full 3 years before I ever married Mr. Vernon. He has absolutely no equity claim to this physical structure." The older officer frowned, clearly not liking where this was going. "Ma'am, with all due respect to your property deed, if he has established residency here by receiving mail and living here, you cannot legally perform a self-help eviction and just lock him out. That is a matter for a civil court judge to decide. You cannot just magically declare a marriage and a residency over in the middle of the night. Ordinarily, officer, you would be absolutely 100% correct, I agreed pleasantly. I know the law. But Vernon has a notorious tendency to rush into things without thinking them through. You see, he cannot be locked out of his marital home, because he legally ended our marriage yesterday afternoon. Both officers stared at me blankly. He got married yesterday, I stated clearly. To someone else. I reached into the deep pocket of my silk robe and pulled out my cell phone. I had already prepared for this moment. I unlocked the screen. I had the bright, garish picture from the Las Vegas chapel and the vicious text message pulled up and ready to go. I turned the glowing screen outward and held it up directly toward the two police officers. I stood there in silence and watched them lean forward to read the screen. I saw the exact, precise moment the entire bizarre story clicked firmly into place in their law enforcement brains. The younger cop's eyes widened to the size of saucers as he read the words. He quickly looked away, staring hard at the siding of my house, violently biting the inside of his cheek as he actively fought to suppress a massive, unprofessional smile. The older cop, however, did not smile. He just stood there, completely still, and stared at the glowing screen. He read the text message once. He read it a second time. His eyes scanned the beaming, grinning faces of Vernon and my sister Darlene posing with their shiny new marriage certificate. Slowly, the older officer lifted his gaze from the phone. He looked at me. Really looked at me, seeing me not as a crazy, hysterical housewife, but as a woman who had just survived a massive emotional explosion. The weary suspicion completely drained out of his eyes, immediately replaced by a look of profound, astonished respect. He let out a very low, long whistle under his breath. "Ma'am, is that woman?" "My sister," I finished the sentence for him, my voice completely deadpan. "Yes. That is my younger sister." The older cop slowly shook his head, looking back down at the phone, then back up to the mountain of packed bags inside my doorway. "Well, I will be damned," he muttered softly. As if perfectly on cue, the heavy black radio clipped to the officer's shoulder violently crackled to life. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. What is your current status at the residence?" The dispatcher's voice buzzed loudly. "The male complainant is currently on the line with us again from the airport payphone. He is aggressively demanding to know why you have not physically breached the door to his house yet." The older officer did not take his eyes off my face as he slowly reached up and unclipped the radio microphone from his shoulder. He pressed the button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Stand by." He looked directly at me. "Ma'am, regarding his personal belongings?" "They are fully packed and ready for immediate collection," I said, gesturing to the massive pile. "As you can see, they are stacked neatly right here in the foyer. I have not damaged a single item. I have not touched a single thing that was not exclusively purchased by him." The officer nodded his head in approval. He keyed the radio microphone again. "Dispatch, please advise the complainant that this situation is strictly a civil matter, and we will absolutely not be forcing entry into the premises today. The residence has been confirmed as the sole, legal property of Loretta." He paused for a second. I could clearly see the faint ghost of a very satisfied smile twitching under his thick gray mustache. "You can also advise the complainant," the officer continued, speaking loudly and clearly into the radio, "that Loretta has just presented us with irrefutable photographic evidence that he committed felony bigamy in Clark County, Nevada, approximately 6 hours ago. If the complainant wishes, we can gladly have a county detective meet him at the airport baggage claim to discuss filing a formal criminal complaint regarding his multiple marriages." There were a few seconds of heavy static silence from the radio. Then, the response that came through the small speaker was not the calm, professional voice of the police dispatcher. It was a raw, unfiltered, agonizing shriek of pure, unadulterated panic and rage. Vernon was clearly listening on speakerphone at the dispatch center. He was screaming my name at the top of his lungs. He was screaming incoherently about his constitutional rights, about calling his expensive lawyer, about needing access to his bank accounts and his salary. It was a pathetic, chaotic symphony of noise. It was the exact, undeniable sound of an arrogant man realizing that the perfectly constructed, secure little world he had so casually set on fire had just collapsed directly onto his own head. The younger cop finally gave up trying to hide it. He bit his lower lip hard, but his shoulders were actively shaking with silent laughter. The older officer remained perfectly stoic. He calmly keyed the radio one last time. "Sir, you need to calm down immediately and contact an attorney. Do not approach the residence. Unit 7 is clearing the scene." He clipped the radio back onto his shoulder and turned his attention back to me. "Ma'am, I have a very strong feeling you will be hearing from his lawyer before the day is over." "Officer," I said, offering him a polite, tight smile, "I am absolutely counting on it. I have already compiled the evidence to hand over to my own lawyer." The two officers nodded respectfully, wished me a very safe and quiet day, and walked back down the concrete path to their patrol car. I stepped back inside my house. I pushed the heavy wooden door shut. I reached up and slid the brand new, shiny brass bolt firmly into place with a loud click. I leaned my forehead against the cool, solid wood of the door, closed my eyes, and let out a long, shaky breath. Round 1 of this war was officially over. And I had won. I spent the rest of that morning sitting at my kitchen island. My mind was remarkably clear. I picked up my phone and called Bernadette. She was a sharp, no-nonsense family lawyer I had met through a women's networking group. I explained the entire situation to her. I told her about the cancelled credit cards, the drained joint account, and the brand new deadbolts. When I finally told her about the Las Vegas marriage certificate, confirming the bigamy, she let out a loud laugh. "Loretta," Bernadette said, "some clients bring me a tangled mess. You just brought me a gift-wrapped slam dunk for this divorce. Do not engage with them. Document everything." I thanked her and ended the call. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. I was so lost in my thoughts that I did not hear the car engine until it was idling in my driveway. I looked up, and my blood ran cold. It was a beige Buick. My mother's car. I walked into the living room and peered through the blinds. Vernon emerged from the passenger side, his face red with rage. Then, Darlene slid out of the back, pulling a drab beige cardigan tight around herself to play the fragile victim. My older sister, Maxine, climbed out next, wearing her usual judgmental scowl. Finally, my mother, Estelle, stepped out of the driver's seat. This was a highly coordinated family intervention. They marched up to my new front door. The doorbell rang, followed by heavy pounding. "Loretta, open this door this instant," my mother demanded. I walked to the door, slid the heavy brass chain lock into its track, and opened the door just a few inches. The smell of my mother's floral perfume wafted through the crack. "What exactly do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice completely flat. Vernon lunged forward, trying to push the door open, but the chain held firm. "I want to get into my house. I want my credit cards turned back on right now." "There is nothing wrong with my hearing, Vernon," I replied calmly. I looked over his shoulder at the three women. "Mom. Maxine. What are you doing here?" Estelle glared at me. "We are here to talk sense into you. You are making a humiliating scene. Take this chain off and let your husband and your sister inside." The casual cruelty of her words was a physical blow. "He is not my husband," I said through gritted teeth. "And she is absolutely not my sister." Maxine scoffed loudly. "Oh, here is Saint Loretta. You probably drove him to do it with your constant nagging and your strict budget spreadsheets." I ignored her completely and looked at Vernon. "You have exactly 1 hour to remove your belongings from my property. They are piled in the foyer. Whatever you cannot fit into my mother's car will be left right here for the garbage collectors." Then, I looked directly at Darlene. She was crying silent tears, refusing to meet my eyes. I truly hope ruining my life was worth a cheap dress, I told her. Loretta, that is enough, Estelle snapped. No, it is not, I raised my voice. You want to talk about embarrassment? Standing on my porch defending a cheating bigamist is embarrassment. I had a very productive call with my new lawyer, Bernadette. She was highly interested to learn that both of you still work for the exact same corporate parent company. I paused, watching the color drain from Vernon's face. My lawyer reminded me that corporate human resources departments take violations of their fraternization policies very seriously. Especially when it involves a manager abusing his power. A single email with a Vegas marriage certificate is all it takes to trigger an investigation. Think deeply about your salary and your precious promotion while you load your boxes. The effect was glorious. Vernon went chalk white. Darlene let out a panicked sob. Even my mother and Maxine were stunned into silence. I had hit them where it actually hurt. I slammed the heavy door shut and slid the deadbolt into place. I listened as they frantically loaded his heavy boxes into the small trunk. I smiled as I heard Vernon shouting at a rental company because his credit cards were declining. Finally, I heard my mother give her own credit card number over the phone to rent a U-Haul trailer. When they finally drove away, the silence in my house was completely mine. But the days that followed were a suffocating blur. I was deeply thankful we never had children, because a custody battle with that man would have broken me entirely. Instead, I just dealt with the profound silence. Then, my family launched their public assault on Facebook. Darlene posted a massive, rambling screed about living her truth and breaking free from toxic family expectations. She painted Vernon as her misunderstood soulmate and claimed I was a cold, rigid dictator. Vernon followed up with a moody black and white photo, claiming he was the victim of financial abuse and had finally found the courage to choose joy. My mother and Maxine shared the posts, praising Darlene's bravery. Distant relatives sent me messages dripping with condescending pity. I was paralyzed by the betrayal. That is exactly when Roland called. He was an old college friend who worked as a cybersecurity analyst. Loretta, I have seen the circus on Facebook, Roland said directly. Do not engage with them online. We are going to completely obliterate them with hard facts. Arrogance makes people sloppy. Did they ever use Facebook Messenger to communicate? Yes, I replied, sitting up straighter. They used it constantly. I am sending you an email right now. Follow the instructions exactly to download your entire Facebook data archive, he instructed. An hour later, I was sitting at my desk, opening a massive zip file containing years of digital conversations. I searched Darlene's name and spent 3 hours reading through their sordid affair. They mocked the gifts I bought him. They called me the warden. Then, I found the absolute smoking gun. Darlene had written, "He is honestly so clueless. I have been siphoning cash out of their joint checking account for 4 months. I almost have enough saved for our Vegas wedding. I cannot wait to see Loretta's stupid face when she realizes I took her for everything." I stopped breathing. I basically funded her life like a college fund, and she stole from my salary to marry my husband. I logged into my bank and downloaded the statements for the joint account. I used a yellow highlighter to mark every unexplained cash withdrawal. The total stolen money was $14,500. I took high-resolution screenshots of the cruel messages and the highlighted bank statements. I created a new Facebook photo album titled The Truth. I uploaded the evidence and set it to public. My only caption was a quote from Darlene. I typed, "I guess his face was not the only one that looked stupid." I clicked post. If you have made it this far, please do me a favor, like the video and comment number 1 down below. It lets me know how awesome you are and shows that you are right here with me on this journey. Your support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let us get back to my story. My phone started vibrating 5 minutes later and did not stop all night. The narrative war was officially over. Their carefully crafted victim image was spectacularly shattered. In a desperate retaliation, Vernon convinced his father, Frank, to call my boss, Mr. Wallace. Frank lied and claimed I was emotionally unstable and harassing their family. Mr. Wallace called me into his office the next morning. "Loretta, I told Frank that you are the most reliable professional on my team. I told him if he ever called my office with such slanderous accusations again, our corporate legal team would contact him regarding a harassment lawsuit." A massive wave of relief washed over me. I thanked him profusely. Their next gambit was highly illegal. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, my security camera notified me of motion at the front window. I checked the live feed. Darlene was intoxicated, trying to pry open my window with a rusty trowel, crying about needing to retrieve our grandmother's antique pearls. Vernon was hiding in the shadows, shushing her. I simply tapped the panic button on my phone. The deafening security siren blared, and the floodlights illuminated the yard. They scrambled away like terrified raccoons just as a police cruiser rounded the corner. The police filed a report for attempted trespassing. The peak of their delusional entitlement came from Harriet, Vernon's mother. She called me, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Loretta, marriage is a sacred vow." "Vernon made a silly mistake," Harriet said smoothly. "The stress of a public divorce could ruin his career. And poor Darlene cannot support him financially the way you did." "Harriet," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You are asking me to take back the husband who slept with my sister, married her, and tried to steal $14,000, simply because it would be financially inconvenient for him to face the consequences?" Harriet gasped indignantly. "You sound incredibly vindictive. I thought you were a better Christian." "Thank you for your concern. Goodbye," I said. I hung up and permanently blocked her number, along with my mother and Maxine. The morning of the divorce hearing was gray and overcast. I walked into the courtroom with Bernadette. Vernon and Darlene looked horrific. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced by sleep-deprived anxiety. Their slick lawyer delivered a theatrical speech, claiming Vernon suffered a depressive episode and the affair was a tragic, beautiful mistake. Judge Corinne remained completely impassive. When it was Bernadette's turn, she did not give a speech. She opened a thick binder and submitted the electronic communications into evidence. On June 3, Ms. Darlene wrote, "Do not worry about her finding out. She is far too boring to suspect anything," Bernadette read loudly. "And finally, Your Honor, regarding their financial plans." Ms. Darlene wrote, "I cannot wait to see Loretta's stupid face when she realizes I took her for everything." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Judge Corinne took off her glasses and pinned Vernon with a glacial stare. "Mr. Vernon, is that an accurate quote?" the judge asked dangerously. "It was a joke," Vernon croaked pathetically. "A joke?" Judge Corinne replied. "In what context is actively planning to steal over $14,000 from your wife considered funny?" Vernon wilted into his chair. Darlene burst into tears. The final ruling was swift and brutal. The divorce was granted immediately based on adultery and fraud. I was awarded the house, my retirement accounts, and my car. The house was strictly protected by my grandmother's inheritance. Vernon was awarded his clothes, his Star Wars toys, and the heavy monthly payments for his luxury leased SUV. Then, Judge Corinne delivered the final blow. The court recognizes Ms. Loretta fully supported Mr. Vernon through his executive certification program, resulting in his promotion. Therefore, the court orders Mr. Vernon to pay rehabilitative alimony in the amount of $650 per month for 1 full year. Vernon let out a strangled noise. The idea that he had to send me a check every month completely broke his fragile ego. The real show began outside the courtroom. My mother, Maxine, and Harriet were lurking near the steps. "How could you do this?" my mother hissed at me. "You left your sister with nothing." Harriet lunged forward. "My son is the one with nothing. Your tramp of a daughter lured him in." Vernon is a grown man, my mother yelled back. Maxine jumped in, calling Harriet a delusional bat. Maxine aggressively threw her water bottle at Harriet, but missed and hit my mother in the face. My mother screamed and shoved Maxine, who stumbled into Darlene. It was a full-scale brawl on the public sidewalk. During the chaos, Harriet suddenly looked around wildly. "Where is Vernon?" She glared at Darlene. "He probably ran off with that cheap bartender, Roxanne. That is who he was secretly texting all morning." That public revelation was the final death blow for Darlene. She sank to the concrete sidewalk and wailed in absolute despair. Maxine looked at her weeping sister with pure disgust and walked away. I watched my toxic family destroy each other. I did not feel angry or sad. I just felt completely free. The dust settled over the next few months. Vernon's romance with the young bartender lasted exactly long enough for her to max out his new credit card. When she found out he was fired for his corporate ethics violation, she vanished. He now lives in his childhood bedroom at Harriet's house. Darlene was publicly disowned. She begged Maxine to let her sleep on her lumpy sofa. They live together now, two bitter roommates. Darlene works at a discount shoe store, and ironically, Harriet is actively suing her in small claims court for the money Vernon spent on the affair. I receive my alimony check every month. I deposit it directly into a high-yield savings fund I call the Karma account. I sold the large suburban house. The day the sold sign went up, I felt a massive lightness in my chest. I bought a bright, modern condominium in a vibrant neighborhood. I bought a blindingly bright yellow sofa that Vernon would have hated. I curated my own personal happiness. I started going to the gym and reconnected with my dear friend Colleen. We laughed until our ribs ached. That is exactly where I met Vance. He was a retired history teacher in my spin class. He had kind eyes and a booming laugh. On our third date, I told him the entire horrific story. He listened perfectly quietly. "Loretta," Vance finally said, "that story tells me you are significantly tougher than a $2 steak. And it tells me I am incredibly glad I am not Vernon." I laughed a real, from-the-gut laugh. We are taking things slow, and it is the healthiest relationship I have ever known. I do not live in the dark shadows of the past anymore. The blinding anger is completely gone. I built a highly secure fortress that night, not just with new brass locks, but deep within my own soul. I am my own fiercest protector. I got a loud, unapologetic life that is truly, entirely mine. Thank you so much for being here and letting me share my journey with you today. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.